There really is no denying that cycling is incredibly popular at the moment, and this is obviously due to recent world events that have taken place over the last couple of months. When I've been out and about, I've really noticed that there are far more people getting on bikes and using them for transport, for exercise, or just for fun. Now, I personally am really pleased to see this, but not everyone shares this view. Now, this tension between cyclists and motorists is as old as the hills. It's always going to be there, it's never going to go away, and more importantly, I seriously doubt there will ever be a definitive solution one way or another. But one thing that might help is when you hear an anti-cycling argument, you're able to reply with a well thought out, logical response. Top of this list of anti-cycling arguments, apart from the obvious road tax nonsense of course, is that cyclists should always use the cycle paths. Now, who hasn't been out and about on their bikes and had some amateur traffic cop shout at them from their car telling them to get over and use it? I know I certainly have. But let me tell you now once and for all that you are not legally obliged to use one if you don't want to. Here in the UK, the definitive rules of the road are contained in a document called the Highway Code. And according to Rule 63 of the Highway Code, you can choose to use the cycle path only if it's practical and your skills and experience allow. And furthermore, I've even heard that if you're cycling in excess of 18 miles an hour or 30 kilometers an hour, you should not be using the cycle lane anyway. But unfortunately, I can't remember the source of this, so don't quote me on it. Next up is the argument that cyclists cause congestion, but just think about this for a second. If the number of cyclists on the road was directly linked to the amount of congestion on that road, something like a motorway where cyclists are not allowed to ride would be completely congestion free, and as we all know, that's just not the case. But okay, this argument seems to relate more to towns and cities, particularly the big ones like London and Manchester, where potentially there are as many bikes on the road as there are cars. On the one hand, I can kind of understand the frustration of a motorist sat in a traffic jam and seeing all of these bikes whizzing past them, thinking to themselves, if there were fewer bikes on the road, this traffic would be moving far more freely. But that's just not true. Worst case scenario, a motorist may get stuck behind a cyclist for perhaps 1 or 2 minutes. But all that will do is delay them 1 or 2 minutes getting to the next block of traffic. What you have to remember here, congestion in our towns and cities is not bikes, it's cars. Linked to this is the argument that cyclists cause pollution, and again this is motorists thinking to themselves that if there were fewer cyclists on the road there'd be fewer traffic jams and they wouldn't be sat there with their engines running putting out all these emissions. Again, this is just nonsense. The actual cause of that pollution are the emissions coming from that engine, not from the cyclist. And I would argue that that car would be sat in traffic just like millions of others like it have been doing for decades, regardless of how many cyclists are on the road or not. Another anti-cycling argument is that cyclists are always riding in the middle of the road and holding up the traffic. Now, while cyclists will indeed ride in the middle of the road from time to time, it's usually for one of two very good reasons. The first one is to avoid potholes, and the second one is to avoid being hit by a car door when somebody opens it without looking. Legally speaking, a cyclist is free to use the entire width of the road right up to the white line, but obviously this is not good for road etiquette. Usually what happens is that once the obstacle has been avoided or the parked cars passed, the cyclist will then return to their side of the road, leaving the road free for the motorist to overtake. Us cyclists are pretty vulnerable road users, so hitting a pothole or being hit by a car door can have pretty far-reaching consequences. At best, it may just damage the bike, but at worst, it could cause a pretty severe injury. So it's no surprise that we will do anything we can to avoid it. Another very popular anti-cycling argument is that cyclists think they're above the law and are arrogant. In other words, do you need another reason to dislike somebody? The fact of the matter is that from time to time, yes, cyclists do break the rules of the road, but then so do motorists, so do pedestrians, and so do little old ladies and even people that vote for the monster raving loony party, for heaven's sake. The important thing is that you do obey the rules of the road when you can, and it's only idiots that ride push bikes, that jump red lights or don't stop at pedestrian crossings, that give all of the other responsible cyclists a bad name. And as for being arrogant, that's usually a term that motorists use after they've either just hit a cyclist or passed them very, very closely, and the cyclist is not best pleased. Now, I did hint at the road tax thing a little earlier, but very closely associated with that is the anti-cycling argument that us cyclists should all have some sort of insurance. And okay, if a cyclist is involved in an accident and injures somebody or damages somebody's property, then I suppose it's only fair that that person wants some sort of compensation. But if you live here in the UK and you are a member of British Cycling, many of their membership packages already have insurance, so you are completely covered, and that just completely dismisses their argument. Along the same lines is the anti-cycling argument that cyclists should have some sort of license and the bikes should have some sort of MOT. Now, if you're not from the UK, an MOT is a test that every car has to undergo to make sure that it's safe, roadworthy, and the engine emissions are within limits. Now, if you think about it, a car is a massive chunk of metal that's very capable of injuring somebody if it's not safe and roadworthy. And if you look at a bike, the most likely thing is that if that's not safe and roadworthy, the person that's likely to be injured is the cyclists themselves. And as for the emissions, well, cyclists don't produce any emissions, so there's no need to test for it. At the end of the day, this argument between cyclists and motorists is going to continue ad infinitum, and I seriously doubt that we will ever learn to play nicely together. The bottom line is that if you want to hate somebody, you will find a reason, and that reason very rarely needs to be based in logic or even common sense. Thanks for watching.